You might want to sit down for this one. No, really, this isn't your usual weather update or an awkward headline about a cat becoming mayor of some small town. No, today we're diving quite literally into one of the most powerful natural events on Earth. Now picture this. It's Wednesday morning, far off on Russia's Pacific edge, in the sort of place that looks like it was designed by Mother Nature on an off day. Volcanoes, freezing winds, and enough seismic activity to make your cup of tea jitter. Then boom, just past 11:25 a.m. local time, the Earth didn't just shake, it roared. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Next UK, your go-to for real stories and sharp analysis. A staggering 8.8 magnitude earthquake ripped through the crust off the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's not just big, that's massive. We're talking about the kind of geological tantrum that makes the planet sit up and pay attention. If earthquakes were graded like exams, this one would have aced it and terrified the invigilator. So what happens next when the Earth throws a tantrum under the sea? You guessed it. Tsunami alerts. Not just a little ripple by the shore, but a siren call across the Pacific. At least 2 million people, yes, 2 million, were told to pack up and move to higher ground. That's Russia, Japan, Hawaii, and even places as far-flung as Peru and Mexico started holding their breath. That's not something you hear every day. A wave traveling halfway across the planet. Powered by nothing but raw tectonic energy. If you're still with me, good, because it gets even more unbelievable. But hey, before we go further, if you're already invested in this wild story, maybe drop a like. I mean, if we're all going to get a bit anxious about shifting continents, we might as well do it together. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already. You know, just in case we need to send out our own alert. Now back to Russia. Imagine the scene in Severokurilsk, a remote port town that most people couldn't place on a map if their life depended on it. Suddenly, waves started pushing inland, climbing past buildings with the kind of grace only nature can have. Graceful, yet horrifying. Water surged into a fish processing facility. Boats weren't just rocking, they were vanishing, torn from their moorings like toys. Authorities there reported waves up to 4 meters. That's 13 feet, if you prefer your terror in imperial units. And then, almost as if the Earth wanted to send a parting gift, the power grid on Russia's Sakhalin Island took a hit. Lights out, quite literally. For now, the full extent of the damage is still unclear. But here's the twist. Russia lifted its tsunami warnings just hours later. Like a movie that builds tension and then casually says, just kidding. But don't relax just yet. Over in Japan, 1.9 million people were told to evacuate. Yes, the same country that's probably the best prepared nation on Earth when it comes to earthquakes and tsunamis. Even they weren't taking chances. People were urged, politely but firmly, to get to higher ground. Imagine the eeriness of sirens, loudspeakers, and a city moving uphill like ants evacuating a nest. The waves that reached Japan were smaller than feared, at first, but their meteorological agency wasn't ruling anything out. They warned of possible waves up to 3 meters, basically enough to pick up your car, turn it around, and politely park it on your neighbor's roof. Of course, in Hawaii, panic mode was briefly activated. Early alerts warned of possible 10-foot waves. 10 feet. That's not something you paddleboard through. That's the kind of thing that makes emergency management teams suddenly develop caffeine addictions. Thankfully, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center later downgraded the alert. But let's be honest, even when they say it's just an advisory, you still double-check how close you live to the beach. So what does all this mean? Well, let's have a quick reality check. The big terrifying thing is over, for now. But waves are still pinging across the Pacific like ripples in a giant cosmic bathtub. You see, when energy like that gets released under the sea, it doesn't just go away. It travels, fast, quiet, and relentless. And as Professor Chris Goldfinger, whose name alone sounds like he should be in a James Bond film, told the BBC, each coastline, each port, will experience the effects differently. Some will feel a mere nudge, others might get walloped. But it all depends on one invisible factor: the direction of the energy. Think of the earthquake as dropping a rock in a puddle. The ripples go out, but not equally in all directions. And if your country happens to be in the path of that energy beam from Kamchatka, well, time to get the kettle off the table. Want to guess how long it takes for a tsunami wave from Kamchatka to reach the US West Coast? Go on, take a wild guess. 8 to 9 hours. Just enough time to overthink, panic slightly, and then remember you live 50 miles inland. Now let me ask you something. If you were told you had 8 hours before a tsunami hit, what would you do? Would you calmly pack your things, grab the cat, and head for the hills? Or would you spend the first 2 hours Googling, how big is a big wave, and the next 6, convincing yourself it's probably a drill? In Japan, they didn't waste a moment. The country's entire coastal system practically moved like clockwork. Trains were halted, roads redirected, evacuation centers activated, like something out of a dystopian novel. But no, this is just Wednesday in the Pacific Ring of Fire. Helicopters hovered above rooftops, broadcasting loudspeaker warnings in multiple languages. School children were marched up hills with neon vests and emergency backpacks bigger than themselves. It was all calm, efficient, eerily quiet, like a well-rehearsed ballet, choreographed by tectonic dread. Meanwhile, across the sea in Hawaii, the vibe was different. The initial warning of 10-foot waves turned a lot of heads. Surfers, bless them, debated whether to hit the beach or just live stream the event. But before anyone could turn it into a TikTok trend, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center cooled things off with a downgrade. Advisory only, they said. Not that anyone was really feeling casual about it. Stephen Logan, Hawaii's emergency management boss, told folks they could go home. And you could almost hear the collective sigh of relief, followed by the sound of a million flip-flops shuffling back towards the beach. But even then, those minor waves aren't your average gentle splash. They pack punch. We're talking strong surges, unpredictable currents, and the kind of flooding that leaves your front garden looking like Venice on a budget. In the Philippines, alerts echoed across the islands. Fishermen rushed to shore. Boats were pulled in hastily. Entire villages took to higher ground. And over in Indonesia, already a nation scarred by tsunamis of the past, fears were real and memories raw. New Zealand? Same story. Tsunami alerts triggered. Coastal residents nudged gently but firmly away from the sea, with local news stations asking people not to go down to take photos. Because of course, someone always tries. Now here's where it gets a little chaotic. The global media scrambled. Alerts were flying in faster than you could refresh your feed. Russian officials issued warnings, then pulled them back. Japan upped its evacuation count, then dialed it down. Hawaii went full red alert, then eased back into advisory status. It was like watching a global weather system try to make up its mind over whether to panic or shrug. And all the while, the sea kept moving. You can't argue with the ocean. It doesn't care about protocols or press conferences or whether your broadband is fast enough to stream the live wavecam. When it decides to move, it moves. But here's the unsettling bit. Still don't know how bad it really is. That's the nature of earthquakes under the sea. The initial shock is over in seconds, but the consequences trickle in slowly, unpredictably. Damage to underwater cables, cracked ports, flooded warehouses, entire fishing fleets missing, villages without power. These things don't make flashy headlines, but they matter, especially to the people living them. Even now, while you and I are talking, scientists are running new simulations, updating models, recalculating risk. It's like trying to predict where a sneeze goes in a hurricane. One wrong assumption, and you're suddenly caught off guard. And let's not forget, this quake was an 8.8. That puts it among the top tier of earthquakes recorded in modern history. We're talking chilly 2010 levels. This isn't a small tremor. It's not the kind of thing you mop up after with a few sandbags and some strong coffee. It's an event that will be studied, modeled, and obsessed over for years. And not just by scientists, but by governments, emergency services, insurance companies, and yes, YouTubers like us. And you know what's wild? Despite all this chaos, millions evacuated, waves lashing ports, power knocked out, we're incredibly lucky. Because the ocean, this time, decided not to go full disaster movie. So, let's ask the obvious question. How did we dodge the bullet? Because when you hear 8.8 magnitude earthquake and Pacific-wide tsunami alert, your brain goes straight to doomsday mode. Not advisories, not downgraded warnings. We're wired to expect chaos, devastation, apocalyptic Hollywood stuff. But here's the thing. Nature doesn't follow a script. Sometimes, the epicenter is in the right place, deep enough underwater, far enough from population centers, or angled in a way that disperses energy rather than focusing it. In this case, it seems the quake's energy traveled mostly southeast. That's physics. That's luck. That's the ocean saying, not today. Still, it's got people asking, if something this big can happen relatively quietly, what would it take to trigger something truly catastrophic? Let me take you back to 2004, Boxing Day, a 9.1 earthquake near Sumatra. Tsunami waves up to 30 meters. Over 230,000 people killed across 14 countries. That wasn't ancient history. That was one bad day in modern memory. And a lot of the systems we have now, like those alerts you saw flashing this week, were built in the aftermath of that tragedy. So yes, alerts worked. People moved. The science held up. But the line between safe and submerged was razor thin. And here's a moment to pause, because we often think of tsunamis as massive walls of water crashing onto cities like a cinematic beast. But often, they're sneakier. More like the tide, suddenly deciding it's had enough of your coastline and wants to live inland for a bit. Sometimes the sea draws back first, eerily exposing the seabed. Kids run out to see the fish flopping about, and then the wave returns, fast, relentless, silent until it's right on top of you. In Severo-Kurilsk, that wave didn't knock buildings over, it climbed into them. It flooded portside warehouses, it ripped boats from their ropes. Not spectacular in a disaster movie way, but absolutely terrifying if you live there. Now let's talk science for a second. Because while we were all doom-scrolling and rechecking the warning apps, geologists were having a field day. An 8.8 quake releases more than 250 million tons of TNT in energy. Let that sink in. That's equivalent to about 17,000 Hiroshima bombs. And yet, thanks to geography, angle, and a bit of good fortune, most of that energy went seaward, not toward cities. If it had gone another direction, just a few degrees off, we might have been looking at a very different story. So what now? Well, scientists go to work, models get updated, governments ask questions. Should alerts have gone out earlier? Did evacuation routes work? Were power stations too close to shore? And yes, some will ask if this is a sign of something bigger. You've probably heard it already. Are more earthquakes coming? Is this linked to climate change? Is the planet angry with us? Fair questions, but complicated ones. The truth is, tectonic activity, like this, is mostly independent from climate shifts. Earthquakes happen because of plate movement. They've been doing it for millions of years. Long before we built cities, roads, or had YouTube channels. But there's one thing we have changed: our vulnerability. More people live near coastlines now than ever before. We build bigger cities closer to danger zones. We rely more on technology, infrastructure, real-time data. So when something goes wrong, the ripple effect, pun intended, is enormous. And here's where it gets truly uncomfortable. What if next time the alerts don't come soon enough? What if the wave's bigger? What if it hits at night? This isn't fear-mongering. It's the reality that emergency planners wrestle with every day. Because tsunamis don't give you a second chance. There's no pause button, no rewind. That's why drills matter. That's why sirens are tested. That's why you might occasionally get a random "this is only a test" message on your phone at 3 a.m. Annoying? Yes. Necessary? Absolutely. Still with me? Brilliant. Because now I want to hear your thoughts. If you had just 10 minutes to evacuate, what's the one thing you'd grab? Your passport? Your dog? Your mom's lasagna from the fridge? Drop it in the comments. Let's build a disaster bag list together. You know, for fun. And if you've learned something new so far, or if you're now nervously eyeing your nearest body of water, why not give us a like? It tells the algorithm we're not just shouting into the tsunami void, and it helps Next UK keep bringing you real stories, raw details, and the truth behind the headlines. So here we are. The sirens have quieted. The alerts have faded. The ocean has gone back to its usual mystery, vast, silent, and pretending nothing ever happened. But you and I know better, don't we? Somewhere in Kamchatka, the ground still trembles every so often. Aftershocks. Nature's way of reminding you it's not quite done yet. In Severokurilsk, they're counting boats, scrubbing salt water from their shops, wondering what might have happened if the quake had struck an hour later, or if the tide had been just a little higher. In Japan, evacuation shelters are being folded back up. Officials are reviewing procedures. Were there bottlenecks? Did people know where to go? Did the speakers work? The fact that waves weren't catastrophic doesn't mean the response was perfect. And if there's one thing the Japanese are relentless about, it's learning from every single tremor. In Hawaii, surfers are back in the water. Some of them probably never left. But emergency teams are already back at the drawing board, running diagnostics on their alert systems. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center doesn't sleep. They can't afford to. And across the globe, from Indonesia to New Zealand, from Peru to Mexico, coastal communities have just lived through a real-world stress test. One they didn't sign up for, but one they passed, largely with quiet resilience. Still, this isn't just about one earthquake. It's about preparedness, about the fine line between close call and catastrophe. So here's what you and I can take away from this. Know your risks. Keep a bag, batteries, water, documents, even a radio if you're old school. Because when the networks go dark, your survival might depend on what's in your hand, not what's in the cloud. And lastly, don't ignore those boring drills. You know the ones, where your school or office makes everyone stand outside for 10 minutes while someone with a clipboard looks smug. Yeah, those drills, they save lives. Because while we can't stop earthquakes, we can outsmart them. We can be faster, better informed, and just alert enough to outpace the next wave. So, my friend, if you've made it this far, first of all, respect. You've just journeyed through tectonic terror, tsunami tension, and international neo-panic, and you did it all from your screen. No rubber boots required. But let this be more than just an interesting story. Let it be a spark. Ask yourself, am I ready? Would I know what to do? Would my community? Because the earth will shake again. The waves will rise again. That's not a maybe, it's a when. But next time, maybe you'll be the one who helps someone else get to higher ground. Maybe you'll be the voice that says, move now, don't wait. And if nothing else, you've got a story to tell about the day the sea rose up and we, miraculously, were ready. Thanks for sticking with us on Next UK. If this gave you chills or even just a moment to think, smash that like, subscribe for more real-world reporting with a side of wit, and share it with someone who's always late to evacuations. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and maybe keep a spare pair of socks in your go bag. Trust me, you'll thank me later.